Ever get that, like, creepy feeling about somebody? You know, like when you meet someone and something just seems off?
Yeah.
Like you can't quite put your finger on it, but
Right.
something ain't right. That's the kind of unsettling aura that surrounded H. Holmes, one of America's first serial killers.
Yeah, it's truly fascinating. I mean, how can a man present himself, outwardly as charming and successful, but then underneath it all, you have this darkness, this real darkness lurking beneath the surface.
So today, we're going to do a deep dive into H. Holmes,
Okay.
his life,
Mm.
his crimes, but we're not just looking at the gruesome facts.
No, no.
We're going to explore what these facts tell us about human nature,
Mhm.
about deception,
Yeah.
about evil itself, really.
And for this deep dive, we've got some really interesting sources, right? We have these old newspaper accounts. They really capture the shock and horror of the public at the time. We have court transcripts. Those just lay bare the chilling details of his crimes.
They form right there.
And we even have Holmes's own autobiography.
Oh.
And talk out manipulative. This document is riddled with lies.
Really?
Contradictions, you name it.
Wow.
I mean, it's truly a testament to just how good he was at manipulating people.
So this is going to be a wild ride. Buckle up. Get ready to uncover the story of a man who turned the American dream into a total nightmare.
Yeah, and what's so interesting is how Holmes, he was really a product of his time. So the late 19th century, think about it. Rapid industrialization,
Yeah.
social upheaval, and this fascination with death, with the macabre.
Oh, interesting.
It was like the perfect breeding ground.
Yeah.
Perfect environment for someone like Holmes to thrive.
Wow. Okay, so let's unpack this thing. Starting at the beginning. Herdwin Webster Mudgett.
Yeah.
Later he became known as H. Holmes.
Right.
But he was born in New Hampshire, 1861, strict Methodist parents. And even back then, even as a kid,
Yeah.
there were signs that something was different about him.
Absolutely. And, you see these conflicting accounts of him as a child. Some people paint him as this bright, curious kid, but others, they describe him as much more withdrawn. Like he had this aversion to eye contact.
Yeah.
And even then, an unsettling obsession with money.
Huh?
There's even a story about him threatening another boy who showed interest in Clara, who would later become his wife.
Wow, so trouble from the start. I mean, it makes you wonder if these were like early glimpses, like little red flags of the darkness that would consume him later.
Yeah, it's a question that's fascinated psychologists and criminologists for decades, right? Was Holmes just born evil? Or did his experiences shape him into the monster he became? It's the classic nature versus nurture debate.
Well, his fascination with anatomy definitely took a pretty disturbing turn.
Oh, yeah.
Like in medical school, he actually asked to take an infant's body home
I know.
for dissection.
It's creepy. It's really creepy. Now, in fairness, medical schools back then were a whole different ballgame.
Right.
Corpses were hard to come by.
Oh, right.
And grave robbing, that wasn't uncommon.
No.
But even knowing that context, even then, Holmes's request, it stood out. It was strange. It
Yeah.
unsettled people.
And get this, his charming nickname from med school was
A smegma.
Smegma. Yeah.
I mean, for those who don't know, that's a bodily secretion. It doesn't exactly paint a picture of good hygiene.
No, it does not.
Yeah.
Quite a contrast to the suave persona he crafted later on, huh?
Absolutely, yeah. Crude as it is, it really highlights that contrast, that stark contrast between the facade that Holmes so carefully constructed
Right.
and these darker aspects of his personality that he kept hidden, hidden from the world.
And speaking of facades, it seems like his obsession with, getting rich quick, that led him down a pretty dangerous path. Like, he dreamed of inventing a miracle cure, right? Even turned his boarding house room into this makeshift lab,
Yeah.
much to the horror of his landlady.
Oh, yeah, he was always scheming, always trying to find an angle. I mean, like, during a smallpox scare, he posed as a health official, charging people for these mandatory vaccines that he probably got illegally.
Seriously.
Wow.
Exploiting people's fear for profit?
Yeah.
Sounds like a classic Holmes move.
Classic.
So his manipulations, they didn't stop there, huh?
No, not at all. When his landlord would press him for rent, Holmes would just burst into tears.
Oh,
Guilt trip his way out of paying.
are you serious?
Oh, yeah.
It's amazing how he could just turn on the waterworks like that on demand.
I know.
But it speaks to this deep-seated need that he had to control, to manipulate everyone around him.
It's a pattern, and we're going to see it again and again throughout his life.
Yeah.
He weaves this web of deceit, so intricate, so elaborate, it's almost impossible to believe.
Yeah, and this web of deceit brings us to a turning point, I think a pivotal moment in Holmes's life. His move to Chicago, he marries Myrta Belknap, this is wife number 2, by the way,
Right.
while still married to Clara,
Oh, yeah.
and then he sets his sights on this pharmacy, owned by elderly Mrs. Holton.
Holmes, he saw opportunity everywhere. But with Mrs. Holton's pharmacy, he saw a chance to not only get a foothold, in this new city, but also to build something much more sinister, his infamous murder castle.
This is where things take a really dark turn. Okay, so he buys the pharmacy,
Right.
but his real plan, much grander.
Yeah.
Much more terrifying. He starts building this building designed for murder and disposal of bodies.
Yeah, the Chicago Tribune at the time, they described the building as this crooked house.
Crooked house?
Chimneys stuck out where chimneys should never stick out, they wrote, and doors that had no rooms. It was bizarre.
It's like straight out of some gothic horror novel.
Yeah.
Secret rooms, hidden passages, chutes leading to the basement.
And to make sure no one figured out what he was really up to, Holmes was smart. He'd hire contractors and then fire them, constantly changing. So no one person ever had the full picture of his plan.
Wow. It's just chilling to think of the level of planning, the deception that went into creating this house of horrors.
Oh, yeah. And all the while, juggling multiple wives, running scams with this accomplice, Benjamin Petal.
Oh, right.
Just spinning this web of lies that would eventually ensnare so many victims.
One of those victims, Minnie Williams, young woman. Holmes has completely charmed her. Promised her marriage, used her inheritance to fund his schemes, and then just turned on her.
Yeah.
Accused her of murdering her own sister, Nanny.
It's just horrifying how he would use manipulation, gaslighting to control everyone around him.
Yeah.
Deflect blame, escape accountability.
And then there's this story of the Patel family. Oh, man. Holmes, he orchestrated Benjamin Patel's death, staged it as an accident to collect insurance money, and then he sent Patel's wife, Carrie, on this wild goose chase across the country looking for him, all while he was holding her children captive in the murder castle.
Yeah, the cruelty that he inflicted on that family, it's almost unimaginable. He even intercepted the letters that Carrie wrote to her children, so they died thinking their mother had abandoned them.
That's awful. He lured Alice and Nellie, those young kids, into a trunk, gassed them with a hose connected to a gas jet, and then buried their bodies in the basement of a rental house.
It's just heartbreaking. In this case, I think more than any other, it shows the depths of Holmes's depravity, how chillingly easy it was for him to just compartmentalize his actions.
As his paranoia grew, he fled Chicago with his third wife, Georgiana Yoke. But his escape was short-lived. He couldn't outrun his past. The walls were closing in.
It's like, Holmes was practically a character ripped from those dime novels everyone was reading back then. Always moving, changing names, leaving this trail of chaos and deceit.
The man had so many aliases. Alexander Bond, Benton Lyman, H.M. Pratt. He even got his third wife, Georgiana, to call him Henry Mansfield Howard. Said it was for an inheritance.
Oh, that inheritance. Just another one of his fabrications. He'd tricked Minnie Williams into signing over her property in Texas, and now he was setting his sights on Georgiana's inheritance from her grandmother.
Even with everything closing in on him, he just couldn't resist the con, the manipulation.
It was all a game to him. People were just pawns to be used and tossed aside.
Which brings us back to Benjamin Petal. Holmes had sent him to Fort Worth, right, to set up another one of his murder castles. But things went south when Petal tried to back out, said his youngest was sick.
You gotta wonder if Patel knew, even a little, the kind of danger he was in. Sadly, I think he realized way too late that he'd gotten mixed up in something truly dark.
Holmes saw Patel's hesitation as a betrayal, decided he was useless. So he lured Patel to Philadelphia, made up this whole story about an accidental explosion and killed him, probably with chloroform.
It's incredible how easily he could just spin these elaborate lies and get people to play along. He even staged the scene to look like an accident, poured chloroform into Patel's stomach after he was dead, trying to fool the coroner.
The level of detail, the planning, it's just mind-blowing. And then, to make it even worse, he made Patel's little girl, Alice, identify the body, putting her through that.
It's hard to imagine that level of cruelty. And all the while, he's stringing Carrie along, making her believe her husband's alive and in hiding, sends her on this agonizing chase across the country, playing with her grief and desperation.
And don't forget, he kept all the letters Carrie wrote to her kids. They never reached them. They died thinking their own mother had abandoned them.
Just awful. And the way he killed Alice and Nellie is just unimaginable.
Tricked them into a trunk, gassed them with a hose from a gas jet. In his confession, he talks about their blackened and distorted faces with this chilling detachment. It's hard to grasp.
Then he buried their bodies in the basement of a rental house. Said he did it with fiendish delight. Clear as day that Holmes got some kind of twisted pleasure from the suffering of others, especially those he saw as weak, vulnerable.
And remember, this is all while he's still juggling multiple wives' fake identities. The guy even tried to con a fellow inmate while he was in jail for insurance fraud.
He just couldn't stop scheming, even when facing serious consequences. He was like a puppeteer, pulling everyone's strings, orchestrating their lives, their deaths, all for his own twisted amusement.
But like all puppet masters, eventually those strings get tangled, the illusion breaks down. The Pinkerton Detective Agency, they were on his tail. And a few missteps, some betrayals, led to his capture.
Almost like his own arrogance, his recklessness finally caught up with him. Thought he was too smart to get caught, but his whole house of cards came tumbling down.
The way it all unraveled is almost as fascinating as the crimes themselves. It's like you peek behind the curtain and see the cracks in his carefully constructed facade. You see how chaotic and unsustainable his whole charade was.
The Pinkertons finally got him in Boston. And get this, he was trying to reinvent himself as Herman Webster Mudgett again.
You can't make this stuff up. Claimed he had amnesia for the past 6 years, conveniently forgot all about the bigamy and the murders.
Desperate attempt to escape responsibility, but his luck had run out.
And his confessions. What a mess. Truths, half-truths, outright lies, spinning yarns about murders, conspiracies, blaming everyone but himself. Even claimed Minnie Williams killed her sister in a jealous rage.
It's important to remember a lot of his confessions were probably exaggerated. He wanted the attention, the notoriety, and the profit. He even sold his so-called confession to the Hearst Corporation for a big chunk of change. Master manipulator to the very end.
So finally, he had to face the music. Holmes was charged with the murder of Benjamin Pitchell, and the courtroom became his stage for the final act. He pleaded not guilty, demanded a jury trial, and then decided to act as his own lawyer for part of it. What was he thinking?
That's a question that's baffled legal experts for over a century. Some think it was narcissism, pure and simple. He wanted to control the story. Others think he was hoping to find some loophole in the system. Either way, his defense attorneys were in over their heads. They even asked for a postponement on the day of the trial, which the judge immediately denied.
Can't imagine the pressure those lawyers were under, defending a client who was a pathological liar and dead set on manipulating the whole thing to his advantage.
The trial was a media circus. Newspapers everywhere were covering every detail. And Carrie Patel's testimony, absolutely heartbreaking. She talked about the wild goose chase, the letters that never came, the realization that her children were gone.
It's incredible she was able to face Holmes in court and relive the horror of what he did to her family. Even the judge, when he was instructing the jury, talked about how unbelievable the case was. Truth is stranger than fiction, he said. After weeks of testimony and legal back and forth, the jury finally came to a decision. And was a verdict?
Guilty. Even Holmes's tricks and manipulation couldn't change the minds of the jury. Too much evidence.
Wow. So even facing execution, he kept on manipulating, offering all these different confessions, sometimes saying he killed more, sometimes less. It's like the attention, even bad attention, just fed his ego. He became this morbid celebrity. Even said he killed 27 people, though we'll never know the real number for sure.
Yeah, that's part of what keeps people so fascinated by H Holmes, even today. A master manipulator used people's trust, their weaknesses, left nothing but unanswered questions and so much pain.
It all ended on May 7th, 1896. Hanged at Moyamensing Prison, Philadelphia. And get this, he asked to be buried in cement. Worried about grave robbers.
Kind of ironic, isn't it? A man who spent his life using the dead for profit, robbing graves, manipulating the system. Even in death, he wanted to control things. Didn't want anyone else uncovering his secrets.
You know, there's this theory going around that maybe, just maybe, Holmes was Jack the Ripper. People point to the descriptions, his trip to Europe that no one can account for, and his medical knowledge.
Interesting theory for sure. Gets a lot of true crime fans excited. But the timeline doesn't quite match up. And Holmes was all about these complex schemes, making money. Jack the Ripper seemed more impulsive, more chaotic.
Yeah, and Jack the Ripper left those creepy messages taunting the police. Holmes was all about covering his tracks, making a profit. And what about that Dear Boss letter? Probably a fake anyway, someone wanting attention.
Exactly. So while the Ripper case is still a big mystery, I don't think there's much to link him to Holmes.
So what can we learn from all this? Holmes was a real American monster. Came up in a time when things were changing fast. Ambition, greed, fame, it all seemed more important than doing the right thing. He used the anonymity of the big city, preyed on people, disappeared just as quickly as he showed up.
It's a dark reminder that evil can hide in plain sight. Deception can be so powerful, makes us think. Who can we trust? Do we question people's motives enough? Should we be more careful about those who promise too much?
His case also shows us how the system failed. Law enforcement wasn't what it should have been, records weren't kept properly, and everyone was obsessed with these sensational stories. All of that helped him get away with it for so long.
Holmes's story still fascinates us. It scares us. Reminds us that evil can hide behind charm, behind a friendly face. We need to be careful. We need to be aware. Manipulation and deception are everywhere.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into H. Holmes, we're left with some uneasy questions. Holmes was a master manipulator, but he also needed other people to go along with it. People looking the other way, people who were too trusting, people putting money before morals. What does that tell us about ourselves? About the dangers of letting bad behavior slide?
That's a good question to think about. And it goes way beyond just true crime. The story of H. Holmes is scary, yeah. But it also teaches us something. If we understand how deception works, we can protect ourselves, protect those we care about.
So, if you're interested in this part of American history, keep digging. Check out the original sources, see what you think. And if you like these deep dives, don't forget to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more.